What if the greatest change you ever made wasn't speaking louder, fighting harder, or proving your worth, but quietly walking away? There comes a moment when silence becomes more powerful than explanation. A moment when your absence begins speaking in ways your presence never could. The person who once overlooked you suddenly finds themselves haunted by memories they never convey. But why does this happen? Why do some people only recognize someone's value after distance has already grown between them? The answer has very little to do with revenge, and everything to do with the hidden patterns of the human mind. Today you'll discover why your distance became their deepest regret, what happens inside their unconscious after losing genuine connection, and why the more you stop chasing, the harder it becomes for them to stop thinking about you. There is a quiet psychological tendency that shapes countless relationships without either person fully realizing it. When someone is consistently present, offering attention, kindness, patience, or emotional support, the human mind gradually begins to treat that presence as permanent. What was once appreciated with gratitude slowly becomes expected. This is not always the result of cruelty or selfishness. More often, it is the unconscious habit of adapting to what feels familiar. The extraordinary becomes ordinary, simply because it is always there. A thoughtful message, a comforting conversation, a reassuring smile, or the quiet certainty that someone will always remain nearby, loses its emotional impact through repetition. The mind, constantly seeking novelty, shifts its focus away from what is stable and toward what appears uncertain or exciting. In doing so, it overlooks the quiet treasures that have been standing in plain sight all along. This unconscious blindness explains why people often fail to recognize another person's true value while they still have easy access to them. They assume tomorrow will look exactly like today. They believe there will always be another opportunity to apologize, another chance to express appreciation, another moment to repair what has been neglected. Because loss has not yet entered the picture, urgency never awakens. Without realizing it, they begin investing less emotional attention into the relationship. Their responses become shorter, their appreciation becomes quieter, and their awareness of the other person's emotional world slowly fades. They are not necessarily deciding to care less. Instead, they are simply allowing familiarity to replace curiosity. Yet the unconscious mind notices something remarkable the moment that familiar presence disappears. Suddenly, the emotional landscape changes. The messages stop arriving. The comforting routine is interrupted. The predictable rhythm that once seemed ordinary is gone. The absence creates a psychological contrast that did not exist before. Only now does the mind begin comparing what is missing with what remains. It discovers an unexpected emptiness, one that cannot easily be filled by distractions or new experiences. What once blended into everyday life suddenly stands out with startling clarity. This is why distance often becomes more powerful than explanation. Endless conversations may fail to communicate your value, because words can be dismissed, debated, or misunderstood. But absence cannot be argued with. It quietly reveals the emotional space you occupied in another person's life. Every habit that involved you now reminds them that something important has changed. Every familiar place, every routine, and every unexpected memory begins carrying your presence, precisely because your physical presence is no longer there. As days pass, the mind naturally starts revisiting moments it once ignored. Small conversations that seemed insignificant suddenly return with surprising emotional weight. Ordinary laughter becomes precious. Simple acts of kindness appear extraordinary in memory. They begin realizing that what they believed was ordinary was, in fact, deeply meaningful. The warmth they overlooked becomes impossible to replace, because genuine connection cannot simply be recreated on demand. It grows quietly over time, often without either person noticing its true depth until it is gone. This realization rarely arrives all at once. It unfolds gradually, almost invisibly. At first, they simply notice your absence. Then they begin wondering why it feels so different. Soon, curiosity turns into reflection, and reflection becomes regret. They recognize that they were not missing just another person. They were missing the unique emotional experience that only you brought into their life. And in that quiet awakening, they finally begin to see the value that had been beside them all along, hidden only by the comfort of believing it would never disappear. Silence has a unique power that words rarely possess. When communication suddenly ends, the mind is not given the comfort of a finished story. Instead, it is left alone with unanswered questions, unfinished emotions, and countless possibilities. Human beings naturally seek closure because uncertainty creates psychological tension. When someone who was once a meaningful part of everyday life quietly steps back, the absence of explanation becomes louder than any argument could have been. The mind begins searching for answers that are no longer available from the outside, forcing a person to look inward instead. At first, many people believe the silence will be temporary. They expect another message, another conversation, or another opportunity to continue where everything left off. They reassure themselves that nothing has truly changed. But as the days pass and the silence remains, confidence slowly gives way to curiosity. They begin wondering why the familiar rhythm has disappeared. Questions emerge that had never seemed important before. Did they overlook something? Did they fail to notice your growing disappointment? Was there a moment they dismissed that mattered far more than they realized? These thoughts do not arrive because someone else planted them. They arise naturally from the unconscious desire to complete an emotional story that has been left unfinished. The human mind has an interesting habit when faced with uncertainty. It starts filling empty spaces with memory. Instead of focusing only on the present, it travels backward, replaying conversations, expressions, shared experiences, and seemingly insignificant moments. A brief smile, a kind gesture, or a conversation that once felt ordinary begins returning with unexpected clarity. Memories that were ignored while life moved quickly now demand attention because there is no new interaction to replace them. Silence creates room for reflection, and reflection gives forgotten experiences new emotional meaning. As these memories return, another subtle process begins. The mind starts imagining different outcomes. It quietly asks, what if I had listened more carefully? What if I had shown more appreciation? What if I had responded differently? These questions have no immediate answers, yet they continue repeating because the unconscious dislikes unresolved possibilities. Regret often grows not from what was done, but from imagining what could have been done differently. Every alternative becomes another reminder that the past cannot be rewritten. There is also a deeper reason. Silence becomes so influential. While constant conversation can distract people from their own thoughts, silence removes that distraction. Without new messages or familiar interactions, a person is left face to face with their own emotional world. They can no longer escape uncomfortable feelings by focusing on daily routines alone. Instead, they begin noticing emotions they had previously ignored. Loneliness becomes more noticeable. Appreciation becomes clearer. The emotional importance of the relationship slowly rises to the surface because nothing remains to hide it. Ironically, silence often communicates more than repeated explanations ever could. Explanations invite disagreement, defensiveness, or rationalization. Silence offers none of those opportunities. It simply exists, leaving the other person alone with their own interpretation. In that quiet space, the unconscious begins connecting emotions, memories, and realizations that had been scattered for a long time. Every unanswered question becomes another reason your presence occupies their thoughts. Every quiet evening becomes another opportunity for reflection. Every memory gains emotional weight because there is no longer a living conversation to which to replace it. Over time, what began as simple curiosity often transforms into persistent contemplation. They no longer think about you only because they miss the conversations. They think about you because your silence has become a mirror, reflecting the words they never spoke, the appreciation they never expressed, and the opportunities they assumed would always be waiting. The absence of answers keeps the emotional story alive, making it far more difficult for the mind to simply let go. One of the quietest yet most powerful changes in the human mind occurs after something meaningful can no longer be easily reached. While a relationship is still active, attention is often divided among routines, responsibilities, distractions, and expectations. The mind becomes occupied with what is happening in the present, leaving little room to fully appreciate what is already there. But once distance separates two people, the imagination begins to take over. It starts rebuilding the image of the person who is no longer present, often giving greater emotional significance to qualities that previously went unnoticed. What once felt ordinary slowly becomes extraordinary, not because the person has changed, but because perception has. The unconscious mind has a remarkable tendency to preserve emotionally meaningful experiences while allowing many of the frustrating details to fade. Instead of replaying every disagreement or disappointment, it often returns to moments of warmth, laughter, comfort, and genuine connection. A simple conversation shared over coffee, a supportive message during a difficult day, or the peaceful feeling of knowing someone truly understood you suddenly carries a weight that seemed invisible before. These memories are no longer measured by how ordinary they once appeared. They are measured by the emptiness left behind after they disappeared. As this process continues, the imagination quietly fills in the spaces left by reality. It begins asking what life would feel like if those moments could return. Every memory becomes polished by longing, and every familiar detail gains emotional color. The smile that once passed unnoticed now feels unforgettable. The calm presence that was taken for granted now seems impossible to replace. Even the smallest habits become symbols of comfort, because the mind naturally connects repeated experiences with emotional security. In their absence, these small details become far more valuable than they ever seemed, while they were still part of everyday life. This transformation does not mean the mind creates a false version of you. Rather, it begins seeing truths that were hidden beneath familiarity. While you were present, your consistency made your kindness predictable. Your patience became expected. Your loyalty felt permanent. Because these qualities appeared reliable, they rarely demanded conscious attention. But once they were no longer available, their true significance emerged. The unconscious realized that what had seemed guaranteed was actually a rare gift, one that cannot simply be replaced by another person with similar qualities. Distance also removes the illusion that meaningful connection can be recreated at will. Many people believe they can always find someone else who listens the same way, understands the same way, or offers the same sense of peace. Yet as time passes, they discover that genuine connection is never built through comparison. It is created through countless shared moments, quiet understanding, and emotional trust that develops slowly over time. No new relationship immediately carries the history, comfort, or silent understanding that existed before. This realization deepens the emotional value of what has already been lost. As they continue moving through daily life, unexpected reminders begin appearing everywhere. A familiar song, a favorite place, a certain season, or even a passing expression on a stranger's wall suddenly awakens memories that seemed forgotten. These moments arrive without invitation, gently reminding them of the emotional world they once shared with you. Each reminder strengthens the image their unconscious has been quietly rebuilding. Over time, the version of you that lives in their memory becomes more vivid than the version they tove, once overlooked in reality. This is why distance often changes perception more than constant presence ever could. It removes distraction, strips away assumption, and allows hidden appreciation to rise to the surface. What they lost is no longer judged by everyday familiarity, but by emotional absence. In that absence, they finally recognize that the person they once believed would always remain was never ordinary at all. They begin to understand that your value was not created by your disappearance. It was simply revealed by it. When someone meaningful steps out of your life, the first instinct is often to focus on the loss itself. The mind searches outward, wondering where the other person went or whether they will ever return. Yet after enough time passes, something far more significant begins to happen. The attention that was once directed toward another person slowly turns inward. Without realizing it, they are forced into a confrontation they have been avoiding for much longer than the relationship itself. They begin meeting the parts of themselves that remained hidden while the connection was still intact. As long as someone is constantly present, it is surprisingly easy to blame circumstances, misunderstandings, or even the other person for every difficulty. Daily interactions create endless distractions from honest self-examination. Every disagreement can be explained away. Every missed opportunity can be postponed. Every uncomfortable emotion can be buried beneath another conversation or another routine. But distance removes those distractions. In the quiet that follows, excuses begin losing their strength. There is no longer another person standing close enough to absorb the emotional weight of unresolved patterns. What remains is a mirror reflecting thoughts and behaviors that can no longer be ignored. At first, this realization is uncomfortable. The unconscious naturally resists accepting responsibility because doing so threatens the image people have of themselves. It is easier to believe that relationships simply fade, or that people grow apart without a reason. But silence has a way of exposing truths that constant interaction keeps hidden. Slowly, memories return, not to accuse but to reveal. They begin remembering the moments when they dismissed your feelings, delayed important conversations, ignored your efforts, or assumed your patience had no limit. These memories no longer appear as isolated incidents. They start forming a pattern that is impossible to overlook. This growing awareness often brings an unfamiliar sense of humility. They begin recognizing that the relationship did not disappear overnight. It changed gradually through small choices, repeated habits, and emotional neglect that seemed insignificant at the time. They realize that genuine connection is rarely destroyed by one dramatic event. More often, it is weakened by countless unnoticed moments where understanding could have replaced pride, appreciation could have replaced assumption, and vulnerability could have replaced emotional distance. As this understanding deepens, they also begin discovering fears that were never truly about you. They may recognize a fear of intimacy that caused them to pull away whenever the relationship became emotionally serious. They may notice an unwillingness to express gratitude because vulnerability felt uncomfortable. Perhaps they avoided difficult conversations, believing silence would protect them from conflict, only to discover that avoidance created a much greater loss. These hidden patterns were always present, but they remained invisible because there was never enough reason to question them. Your absence became the event that finally brought them into awareness. The painful truth is that regret often arrives alongside self-knowledge. They are no longer grieving only the loss of your presence. They are grieving the realization of who they could have been if they had acted differently. This form of regret reaches much deeper because it cannot be solved simply by wishing the past had unfolded another way. It requires acknowledging the gap between the person they believed themselves to be and the strain their actions revealed. That recognition is both painful and transformative. In this quiet process of reflection, they begin understanding that losing someone meaningful was not merely an external event. It became an internal awakening. The distance did more than separate two people. It removed every distraction that had protected them from facing their own emotional immaturity, hidden insecurities, and unconscious habits. What they encounter is not simply the memory of you, but a clearer understanding of themselves. And that realization often becomes the heaviest burden they carry, because it cannot be escaped by changing circumstances or finding someone new. Perhaps the most unexpected transformation begins not within the person who was left behind, but within the one who chose to stop chasing. There is a profound difference between giving up on someone and returning to yourself. When a person finally redirects their energy away from constant pursuit and toward their own growth, something subtle yet powerful changes. It is not a dramatic performance designed to provoke regret. It is a quiet shift in identity. Instead of measuring their worth through another person's attention, they begin discovering a deeper sense of stability that no longer depends on external approval. This inner change is often invisible at first, yet it influences every interaction, every decision, and every step they take forward. The human mind is naturally drawn to confidence that does not seek validation. There is something deeply compelling about a person who no longer feels the need to convince others of their value. Such confidence is not loud, arrogant, or demanding. It carries a calm presence that speaks without words. When you stop chasing recognition, affection, or reassurance, your actions begin reflecting a quiet certainty. You no longer react to every silence with anxiety, or every misunderstanding with desperation. Instead, you become grounded in the understanding that your value exists independently of another person's response. This emotional steadiness creates a presence that feels both peaceful and unforgettable. As your focus turns inward, growth begins unfolding in ways that others can sense, even if they cannot immediately explain it. You become more attentive to your own dreams, your own health, your own purpose, and your own peace of mind. The energy that was once spent trying to change another person's feelings is now invested in becoming a fuller version of yourself. This transformation is not about becoming someone different to impress those who left. It is about uncovering qualities that were always within you, but remained hidden beneath fear, self-doubt, or emotional dependence. The more authentic you become, the less your happiness relies on circumstances you cannot control. Ironically, it is often at this point that the person who once overlooked you begins noticing what they failed to see before. They sense a difference, even from a distance. The emotional urgency that once defined your connection has disappeared, replaced by quiet strength. They realize that the version of you they once expected to remain available has evolved into someone who no longer revolves around their approval. This realization can be deeply unsettling because it challenges the assumptions they unconsciously held. They believed your attention would always be waiting. They believed your patience had no limit. Now they are faced with the reality that life continued without them, and you learn to flourish rather than simply endure. This change often awakens a deeper kind of longing. It is no longer based only on missing your presence. It is rooted in witnessing the person you became after releasing the need to be chosen. They begin wondering what conversations they will never have, what moments they will never experience, and what future they unknowingly walked away from. The greatest regret is rarely about losing control over another person. It is about realizing too late that they lost the opportunity to grow alongside someone who was becoming stronger, wiser, and more emotionally complete. True healing carries a quiet influence because it cannot be imitated through appearances alone. It is reflected in patience instead of panic, peace instead of constant proving, and self-respect instead of endless sacrifice. People naturally remember those who help them feel understood, accepted, and safe, but they remember them even more when they discover that such a connection is impossible to replace. Your distance becomes unforgettable, not because you disappeared in anger, but because you continued growing without bitterness. In choosing yourself, you stopped asking the world to confirm your worth. And it is often that silent confidence, born from genuine inner transformation, that remains in another person's mind, long after words, arguments, and explanations have faded away. Sometimes distance is not the end of a connection, it is the beginning of understanding. Not because someone finally lost you, but because they were finally forced to see what had always been there. When you stop chasing your worth and begin living it, the silence you leave behind often teaches lessons that words never could. The greatest transformation is not making someone miss you. It is becoming someone who no longer needs to be chased to know their own value.